I still remember the sound of folding chairs, that cheap metal scrape against the gym floor, the squeak of rubber soles, programs rustling, parents whispering, names being rehearsed under breath before the principal called them out. And behind me, in a row of 6 blue seats reserved for my family, there was nothing. No purse on a chair, no bouquet, no one waving, no one late. Just 6 empty seats in a hot gym that smelled like floor polish, carnation, and the kind of disappointment that has no dignity left in it. I was 17 years old, wearing a borrowed white graduation gown that was 1 inch too short at the wrists. And that was the day I learned a strange truth. Being abandoned in public feels different than being abandoned in private. In private, people can always pretend it did not happen. In public, the empty chair says it for them. Before I tell you how that day ended with me crossing a stage alone, and why years later the same town could not get enough seats to watch me graduate medical school, let me take you back to where all of it really started. And if this story resonates with you, like and subscribe, only if it does. I grew up in a town called Belmere. It was one of those southern towns that looked soft from a distance. Tree-lined streets, a courthouse with white columns, a church on every corner, people who smiled while gathering information, people who called gossip concern. Belmere loved 2 things more than truth: appearances and hierarchy. Everybody knew where everybody belonged. The mayor's family belonged near the top. The old money families belonged just under them. The people with clean porches, good casseroles, and the right opinions belonged somewhere in the middle. And my family belonged in a place that was harder to explain. We were known, but not admired. My father, Richard Hale, owned an auto repair shop on the edge of town that did well enough to keep us housed and resentful. He was not a drunk. He was not a criminal, which made him respectable by Belmere standards. My mother, Denise, worked part-time at the front desk of a dental office and full-time at maintaining the illusion that we were 1 good season away from being the family she had wanted. I was the middle child. My older brother, Travis, was the one people called natural. Natural with people. Natural at baseball. Natural at taking up space. My younger sister, Kelsey, had the kind of blonde prettiness that made adults forgive her before she had even done anything wrong. And then there was me, Leah, too quiet for one crowd, too serious for another, too observant for my own good. I was not the child people worried about. I was the child people assumed would manage. That sounds like praise until you live inside it. Because in some families, she'll manage is just another way of saying, we can leave her with less. Less money. Less softness. Less attention. Less room to fail. Less room to need. Our kitchen table was where most of those rules were enforced. The kitchen was long and narrow, with yellowing wallpaper and a ceiling fan that clicked on the 3rd turn like it had a private complaint with life. In the mornings it smelled like burnt toast and coffee. At night it smelled like dish soap, grease, and whatever mood my mother was in. I learned early that love in our house was distributed according to performance. If Travis won, he got praised. If Kelsey cried, she got protected. If I achieved something, it was expected. If I struggled, it was inconvenient. By 9, I knew how to make my own lunches. By 11. I was helping Kelsey with homework. She pretended not to understand. By 13. I was cleaning up after dinners where my father discussed Travis's future as if the rest of us were background furniture. My future existed too. It just never seemed to interest anyone until there was a chore attached to it. The first time I said I wanted to be a doctor, I was 12. My grandmother had been in the hospital for pneumonia, and I spent 3 nights sitting in a vinyl chair beside her bed while my mother went home to rest. Which usually meant smoke on the porch and complain on the phone. The hospital had cold air and fluorescent lights that made everything feel fragile. Nurses moved with a kind of calm authority that fascinated me. They knew what machine was making, what sound. They knew when a patient was pretending to be brave. They knew how to make pain seem manageable for 10 minutes at a time. One of the residents, a woman named Dr. Sethi, crouched beside me after checking my grandmother's lungs and asked if I was doing okay. No one had asked me that in a way that sounded like they actually wanted the answer. So I said yes too quickly. She smiled a little, the way adults do when they know children are lying for survival. Then she said, "You ask good questions." I remember the citrus smell of her hand sanitizer, the navy blue pen in her coat pocket, the soft scrape of her shoes as she stood. I remember thinking, with total certainty, that I wanted to become the kind of person no one dismissed while she was speaking. That night, when I got home, I said it at the kitchen table. "I think I want to be a doctor." Travis laughed first. He was 15 then, tall and loose-jointed, eating spaghetti like the world owed him a second plate. "A doctor?" he said. "You faint when you get blood drawn." "I've fainted once." "You cried watching a horse movie." "That has nothing to do with medicine." Kelsey snorted into her milk. My mother did not look up from the coupons she was clipping. My father twisted pepper over his food and said, "Doctors come from families with money." I still remember how quickly the room lost oxygen. It was not what he said. It was how ordinary he made it sound. As if he were not crushing anything. As if he were merely noting the weather. "I can get scholarships?" I said, "For college, maybe." He said, "Medical school is a different planet." My mother sighed like I had started an argument instead of a dream. "Leah, honey, nobody's saying don't be smart. But let's be realistic." Realistic. That word came up a lot in our house. Realistic meant cheaper for them. Smaller for me. When Travis wanted a better glove, it was an investment. When Kelsey wanted dance lessons, it was good for her confidence. When I wanted SAT prep books, it was suddenly time to discuss budgets and humility. So I learned to want things quietly. I got my first job at 14 shelving books at the public library after school. It paid barely anything, but I loved the order of the place. The hush, the cool air, the old paper smell. The way a person could disappear into a stack and come back changed. Mrs. Ellison, the librarian, wore cardigan sets and half-moon glasses and believed in me with the ferocity of someone who had watched talent go to waste too often. When she learned I wanted medicine, she did not laugh. She handed me used biology guides, MCAT prep books that had been donated, a cracked anatomy atlas with someone's old notes in the margins. "Read above your grade level," she told me. "The mind stretches before life does." That became my private religion. I studied in corners, at the library, on the back steps, At the laundromat when the dryers were running and the air smelled like detergent and heat. At baseball games while everyone watched Travis and I watched my future. Belmere admired achievement in theory. In practice, it only admired achievement from people it had already decided belonged. A smart boy from the right family was promising. A smart girl from my family was suspicious. Too ambitious. Too proud. Too likely to leave and come back talking differently. By sophomore year, I had a reputation at school. Teachers liked me. Some students called me stuck up for raising my hand too much. Others copied my homework and made fun of my shoes. I did not have many close friends, but I had enough. Priya Patel was one of them. Her parents owned the pharmacy downtown, and she had the kind of sharp mind that frightened mediocre people. We met in chemistry when our teacher paired us for a lab, and she said, before I could speak, "You measure. I don't trust boys with acids or girls who say they're bad at math." I laughed so hard I spilled distilled water on the counter. We stayed friends after that. There are people who arrive in your life like a window opening. Priya was like that. With her, I did not have to explain why I cared so much, or why every grade felt like a rung on a ladder that could disappear if I stepped wrong. Her parents were strict, but not cruel. Their house smelled like cumin, clean laundry, and printer ink from all the school forms her mother kept in neat folders. When I slept over there, I saw what structure looked like when it was not powered by contempt. It stunned me. The first time Mrs. Patel asked if I wanted seconds and sounded disappointed when I said no. I had to go to the bathroom and stare at myself until my face stopped burning. I had not realized hunger could be emotional too. At home, things got narrower as Travis got older. His baseball started costing more. Travel tournaments, hotel stays, gas, team fees, replacement cleats. There was always money for anything that fed his future, because his future was treated like a family project. Mine was treated like a solo hobby. I knew exactly when the difference stopped being abstract. Junior year. The guidance office had a college planning night for students and parents. The flyer had been on our fridge for 2 weeks, curling at the edges beside a pizza coupon and a dentist reminder card. I circled the date in blue ink and told my mother twice. "Don't let me forget." I said. She barely listened. The day came warm and windy. I got home from school, changed from my jeans into the nicest sweater I had, and waited at the kitchen table with my folder of transcripts, test scores, and scholarship lists. My mother came in at 5:30 carrying grocery bags. "You're not ready?" I asked. "For what?" I thought she was joking. Then I realized she was not. "The college planning thing?" She stared at me, then at the clock, then at the bags. "Oh God." "What do you mean?" "Oh God." Leah. I completely forgot. My father was already at Travis's game. Kelsey had dance rehearsal. And my mother said the sentence that would become one of the most repeated lines of my adolescence. "You can go by yourself. You'll know what to ask." That was it. No apology with weight. No scramble to make it work. Just confidence that I would manage the disappointment efficiently. So I went alone. The school cafeteria had been dressed up with round tables and coffee urns. Parents sat beside children with legal pads and hopeful expressions. Fathers in work shirts. Mothers with tote bags full of paperwork. Everybody looked mildly overwhelmed together. I sat at a table by myself. A woman from the state university explained financial aid, A counselor discussed recommendation letters. A man in a navy suit said the words merit scholarship, application fee waiver, need-based package, pre-med track. And I wrote every word down like it was oxygen. When the Q&A opened, parents asked things I had not even known to worry about. Housing deposits, meal plans, residency requirements, emergency funds. One mother reached over and slid me an extra handout because she saw I was alone and thought maybe I had missed one. I thanked her. Then I spent 20 minutes in the girls' bathroom afterward because I refused to cry where anyone could see me. That night at dinner, my father asked how it went without looking up from the local sports page. Fine, I said. What'd they say? That college is expensive. He laughed once. Well, there you go. That was the family version of a conversation about my future. By senior year, I had perfected the art of strategic invisibility. I stayed useful. Not important. Useful. I watched Kelsey when my mother wanted a break. I typed forms for my father because he hated computers. I edited Travis's essays because baseball coaches liked athletes who seemed capable of punctuation. And in the hours, no one noticed. I built an escape route. I took every AP class I could. Volunteered at the county hospital. Shadowed doctors when I was allowed. Stacked scholarship essays in color-coded folders. I learned how to fill out the FAFSA at the library because my parents kept postponing it. Then I learned how to sit them down one at a time and extract tax information from them like a hostage negotiator. It never occurred to them that all the labor of getting out was being done by the child they assumed had no expensive dreams. The hospital volunteer coordinator was a woman named Marta Ruiz. She had silver hair pulled into a knot so tight it looked architectural. She wore sensible shoes and had no tolerance for dramatics. She started me in the gift shop, then transport, then front desk. Soon she had me helping in patient family waiting areas because, as she put it, you listen without making everything about yourself, which is rarer than people think. That was the first professional compliment I ever received. I carried it for years. Hospitals can break your heart and steady it in the same hour. I saw grief there. Fear. Anger. The small kindnesses that keep strangers alive in each other's memories. I saw a nurse tuck an extra blanket around a sleeping father in a plastic chair. I saw a resident stand in a hallway for 30 seconds with her eyes closed before walking into a room where she needed to say the worst thing anyone had heard all year. I saw competence as mercy. That mattered to me. At school, not everybody hated me. Some people just did not know what to do with me. There is a difference. Mr. Benz, my biology teacher, wrote in red ink on one of my lab reports, "You belong in rooms that ask more of you." I kept that paper in a folder under my mattress. People imagine revenge as fire. It is not always. Sometimes it is paperwork. Sometimes it is discipline. Sometimes it is surviving long enough to become undeniable. The first acceptance letter arrived in late March. The envelope was thick. I knew enough to understand what that meant before I even opened it. I was standing on the porch in jeans and my library sweater, the afternoon air smelling like cut grass and motor oil drifting from my father's shop down the road. My hands shook so hard, I tore the envelope crooked. I got in. State University. Honors program. Partial scholarship. I remember laughing. Then crying. Then laughing again because no one was there to witness either, and that gave me the privacy to feel it honestly. When my mother got home, She looked happy for about 15 seconds. Then, practical. How much is partial? I told her. Her mouth tightened. My father said, "Still too much." I stood there holding the letter. "You haven't even said congratulations." He leaned back in his chair. "Congratulations." Flat. Like he was reading a receipt total. "We can't spend money we don't have." Leah. "I know that. I've applied for more scholarships. And if those don't come through?" I wanted him to say, "We'll figure it out." That old dangerous hope. Instead, he said, "Community college is not a shameful thing." It was not about shame. It was about timing. Transfer route. Pre-med opportunities. Research access. I knew all of that because I had done the work they never bothered to do. "I need the honors track," I said carefully. "For medicine." My mother rubbed her forehead. "Can we not do this tonight?" That was another family phrase. "Can we not do this tonight?" Meaning your future is loud and our comfort is fragile. So I did what I always did. I went quiet. And then I worked harder. In April, I won 2 local scholarships and 1 regional science award. Belmere liked public success if it came with a newspaper photo. Suddenly, people who had ignored me in church hallways were telling my mother she must be proud. She basked in it like she had built me herself. That was new. So was hearing my father tell a customer, "Leah's a real hard worker." As though he had ever once made my life easier. The town paper ran a picture of me holding a certificate beside the principal. I looked older in the photo than I felt. Underneath it, the caption said, "I plan to study biology on a pre-med track." The next Sunday after church, a woman who had once told me not to aim too high squeezed my shoulder and said, "Well, aren't you going to make something of yourself after all?" After all, that phrase stayed with me. As if my existence had been an argument against my own chances. Graduation approached in a blur of forms and final exams, and borrowed hope. Our school held the ceremony in the gym because Belmere never built anything big enough for dreams it did not expect. Caps were navy. Gowns white for girls. Blue for boys. Parents received 6 tickets each. Though in a town that small, they let extra people stand along the back wall if the fire marshal was feeling sentimental. Every girl in my class talked about flowers. Reservations. Photos. Parties. I told myself I did not care. That was not true. I cared desperately. I just knew better than to build emotional furniture in a house that had never stayed standing for me. 3 days before graduation, Travis announced he had been invited to a showcase tournament in Atlanta. Same day as my ceremony. My father was thrilled. "This is huge," he said. "Scouts are going to be there." My mother asked what time they needed to leave. I was standing at the sink rinsing plates. I waited for the correction. For one of them to remember. For reality to re-enter the room. It did not. I turned off the water. "My graduation is Saturday." Silence. Then my father said, "We know." My mother winced before she spoke, which somehow made it worse. "Leah, honey, we've been talking about this." "No. You haven't. You've been deciding without me. It's Travis's last real chance before summer. It is my graduation. We are proud of you." She said too fast. "You know that." That sentence always arrived when evidence suggested otherwise. Kelsey spoke up from the table. I have recital photos Sunday. Can't Leah just have dinner after? I looked at her. Not because what she said mattered. Because of how easy it was for her to say it. As if my milestone were movable. As if I were. My father folded his napkin. You've always been the independent one. There it was again. The compliment-shaped neglect. I only became independent because I had to. I said. That got his attention. His eyes sharpened. My mother's face hardened in self-defense. Don't start acting like some victim, she said. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because my body needed somewhere to put the shock. I'm not acting. Travis leaned back in his chair, already dressed in his own future. Come on, Leah. It's just high school graduation. That was the moment. Not because it was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me. Because it was so clean, so revealing. He did not even think he needed to disguise the hierarchy. His opportunity was real. My achievement was sentimental. I dried my hands slowly and said, Okay. My mother looked relieved too quickly. We'll celebrate later. Sure, I said. They took my silence for acceptance. It was actually the first brick in a wall I would spend the next decade building. Priya found me in the parking lot after school the next day. She was holding 2 iced coffees and looked at my face for half a second before handing me one. They're not coming. Are they? I shook my head. What excuse? Baseball. She closed her eyes. God, I'm sorry. It's fine. No? It's familiar. That's different. Priya always knew where to put the knife. Not into me. Into the truth. My parents will be there, she said. They'll cheer for you. That nearly undid me. I stared at the condensation sliding down the cup. I don't want borrowed pity. It's not pity, she said. It's witness. Witness. That word mattered. Sometimes survival depends on at least one person being able to say, yes, that happened. And yes, you deserved better. Graduation day arrived heavy with June heat. The sky over Belmere looked bleached. The parking lot shimmered. Girls posed for photos with curling irons still burning on bathroom counters at home. Boys pretended not to care and rented dress shoes that blistered their heels. In the locker room, somebody was spraying cheap floral perfume. Hairspray hung in the air like weather. Teachers pinned cords and adjusted collars and told us we were going to do great things. I checked my phone 3 times. No message. No running late. No lie dressed as effort. By the time we lined up outside the gym doors, I already knew the truth. Nobody was coming. Not one of them. When we marched into pomp and circumstance, the air inside the gym hit me warm and stale. Families leaned into aisles, waving, filming, calling names in whispers they thought were discreet. Camera flashes popped. Babies fussed. Somebody coughed through the whole second row. I found my seats immediately. Rovge. Section left. 6 empties in a line. There is a special violence in seeing proof from a distance. It gives you time to understand before you can pretend otherwise. I kept walking. Sat with my class. Smiled when appropriate. clapped for people I liked, tried not to imagine all the reasons my family might give later. Because the reasons were irrelevant now. Absence has already completed the sentence by then. When my name was called, I crossed the stage alone. The principal shook my hand. The audience clapped politely. And from somewhere near the center section, I heard Mrs. Patel's voice. Loud. Clear. That's our girl. Leah. Then Priya screaming. Then Mr. Patel clapping hard enough to echo. I nearly lost my composure right there under the fluorescent lights. I did not cry. Not because I was strong. Because I knew if I started, I would not stop. After the ceremony, classmates ran into arms. Flowers changed hands. Photos were taken. Mothers cried into tissues. Fathers adjusted caps for pictures. I stood near the side exit, holding my diploma cover and trying to decide how quickly I could leave without making it obvious that nobody was coming for me. Then the Patels appeared. Mrs. Patel had brought yellow roses. Yellow. My favorite, though I had never told her. Maybe Priya had. Maybe kind people sometimes notice what indifferent people miss. Mr. Patel hugged me once. Quick and careful. Priya held up a camera and said, "Stand there. No. Chin up. You look like somebody who should terrify admissions committees." I laughed. Then I cried. Not elegantly. Not in a beautiful movie way. I bent at the waist and cried into my bouquet while the gym emptied around us. No one rushed me. That was the grace of it. No one said, "Don't cry." No one said at least. They just stood there and let me be a person in pain without trying to edit the scene into something easier. That evening, my family came home, sunburned from Atlanta, and talking about Travis's batting practice like history had taken place elsewhere. My mother carried takeout boxes. My father looked tired. Travis was full of himself. Kelsey complained about the hotel pillows. Then, my mother noticed the roses on the counter. "Oh," she said, "you got flowers?" I looked at her. I graduated today. I know. No shame. No real remorse. Just irritation that my hurt had not evaporated by the time it became inconvenient to step around. My father set his keys down. How'd it go? There it was again. That tone men use when they know they have no right to ask, but feel entitled to hear an answer anyway. It was exactly what you made it, I said. Then I went to my room and shut the door. That night I packed a box under my bed. Not clothes. Not books. Proof. Copies of scholarship letters. Hospital volunteer records. Recommendation notes. Test scores. Every document that suggested I existed beyond what they found useful. I did not know it then. But that was the night I stopped waiting to be chosen by my own family. The first summer after graduation, I worked 3 jobs. Library in the mornings. Diner in the afternoons. Weekend shifts at the hospital gift shop. The diner smelled like fryer oil and coffee that had been sitting too long. My feet ached constantly. My fingertips always carried a trace of bleach from wiping down tables. I smiled at customers who tipped badly and called me sweetheart because rent was not the only thing desperation charges interest on. I moved into a dorm in August with 2 suitcases. 1 plastic fan. A milk crate of books. And a check from Mrs. Bauer. Ellison tucked inside an envelope marked, For emergencies only. Don't be proud. It was for $200. I cried when I found it. College felt like stepping onto another planet and discovering gravity worked differently there. No one knew my family. No one knew the empty seats. No one knew who was supposed to matter more than me. For the first month, I could not relax enough to enjoy any of it. The dorm hall smelled like ramen, shampoo, and industrial carpet cleaner. Girls left doors open, while music drifted in unevenly from different rooms. My roommate, Tessa, was from Charlotte and had 17 throw pillows and a mother who cried for an hour after move-in. I watched that with the detached fascination of someone observing a culture she did not share. Classes were harder than high school by an entire category. That thrilled me. Biology was fast. Chemistry felt like being chased by numbers. Lab practicals made my skin buzz. For the first time in my life, difficulty did not feel like punishment. It felt like direction. I loved it. I also nearly drowned in it. Money was still a constant problem. My scholarship covered tuition and some housing, but not all of it. Books were obscene. Meal plans were a joke. I worked at the campus library until midnight 3 nights a week and spent the rest of my hours calculating what I could postpone. There were weeks when dinner was peanut butter crackers, an apple, and denial. I did not tell my family. Not because they would have helped. Because they would have used the struggle as evidence that they had been right. That first Thanksgiving, I did not go home. Officially, it was because I had to work. Actually, I could not bear the idea of sitting at the same table pretending the last 6 months had reset anything. Priya came by my dorm the day before she left for New Jersey and dropped off a container of her mother's chicken curry and a note that said, "Eat, study, outlive them." I kept that note too. My family called me more often once I was doing well enough to mention publicly. That is another thing people rarely admit. Some parents become more interested in you when your success starts flattering them. My mother loved telling people I was pre-med. My father started saying, "Our daughter in college," to customers at the shop. Travis called twice when he wanted help writing a transfer application essay after baseball scholarship talks started going badly. Kelsey wanted advice on a science project and then forgot to ask how I was. I noticed all of it. I answered politely. But something in me had cooled. Not frozen. Cooled. Like metal left overnight by an open window. By sophomore year, I had a rhythm. Klasse. Work. Volunteer hours. Study groups. Sleep when possible. Panic when scheduled. I met Daniel in organic chemistry. He was one of those rare men who did not perform intelligence as dominance. He listened before speaking. He asked precise questions. He smelled faintly of cedar and clean soap. The first time he helped me understand a reaction mechanism. He drew it slowly on the board and said, "You already know this. You're just tired." That was so accurate it startled me. We started studying together. Then eating together. Then walking home from the science building under brittle winter trees while our breath fogged in front of us. He was from Asheville. His parents were both teachers. He had the kind of stable kindness that initially made me suspicious. People from chaos often mistake steadiness for a trick. But Daniel was real. He knew how to be gentle without making gentleness theatrical. He also knew enough not to ask why I stiffened whenever someone said, "Your family must be so proud." Not at first. Love entered my life quietly. That mattered. I did not need fireworks. I needed proof that not every close bond arrived with a ledger. By junior year, I was accepted into a summer research program and had the grades to make medical school imaginable in the kind of concrete way that frightened me. Imagine spending years building yourself towards something you want more than sleep, and then realizing it might actually happen. That kind of hope can feel more dangerous than despair. The first time I told my parents I was seriously applying to medical school, my mother laughed from pure surprise. Really? I stared at her over the phone in my tiny off-campus kitchen, where the radiator hissed and the paint near the window had started to peel. Yes. Really? No. I just mean it's so competitive. I know. Well? She said, recovering into something performative. That would certainly prove a lot of people wrong. I remember looking at the chipped mug in my hand and thinking, you still think this is about people being impressed? For me, it was never that. Or not only that, it was about becoming unignorable to myself. Medical school applications are designed, I think, by people who believe suffering should be itemized. Transcripts, personal statement, activity hours, shadowing, recommendations, makat, face, secondaries, interviews, hope, crushing silence, renewed hope. I worked through all of it with a precision that bordered on fever. Daniel read my personal statement 5 times. Priya edited my secondaries like she was cross-examining a witness. Marta Ruiz called me the night before my first interview and said, "Don't shrink your story just because somebody with softer hands is reading it." That line stayed with me too. I interviewed in borrowed blazers and sensible heels that hurt by lunch. I smiled until my face ached. I spoke about medicine and responsibility and resilience without saying what I really meant. Which was this: I know what it costs when the wrong people have power over your worst day. I know what neglect feels like. I know what happens when systems decide some pain deserves better attention than other pain. I know what it means to be looked past. And I never want to be the person doing the looking past. Acceptance to medical school came in February. I was 22. It was raining. Hard. The kind of gray rain that makes afternoon feel like evening. I was standing under the awning outside the campus library, checking my email before work, not expecting anything but logistics and one final rejection. Instead, I saw the word, "Congratulations." For a second, the screen blurred. I thought maybe I had imagined it. I opened the message 3 times. Then I sat down on a wet bench and laughed out loud like somebody unwell. People looked at me. I did not care. I had gotten into medical school. Not because anyone laid a smooth road for me. Not because I had been the family project. Not because Belmere had believed in me. Because I kept going when belief would have been easier if it came from outside. I called Priya first. Then Daniel. Then Marta. I called my mother fourth. She screamed so loudly I had to move the phone from my ear. By dinner time, half of Belmere seemed to know. I could tell because my social media filled with comments from people who had never once asked if I needed a ride to volunteer shifts or money for applications or help with anything at all. So proud of you. Knew you'd do it. You always were special. The problem with delayed recognition is that it often arrives wearing stolen intimacy. They wanted to stand near the outcome without having touched the work. My parents threw me a party that spring. A party. For getting into medical school. There were sheet cakes from the grocery store. Et banner? Relative. Neighbors? People from church who had not spoken to me since I was 15, unless they needed free babysitting advice from my mother. My father toasted me in the backyard with a paper cup of sweet tea and said, "Leah's always had grit. Always." I stood there in a navy dress, smiling for pictures, and felt the old fury rise in a strange new form. Calm. That scared me more than rage would have. Because calm means the wound has had time to harden around its own outline. I thanked people. Cut cake. Accepted cards. Let my mother cry into my shoulder in front of guests. And inside, quietly, I made another decision. They were welcome at the celebration of the acceptance. But if I ever crossed a stage again for something bigger, something that had cost me years instead of months, they would not get automatic access to that moment just because my life had become easier to applaud. Medical school was not noble. It was brutal. There were beautiful moments in it. Yes. But mostly it was long. Long days under fluorescent lights. Long nights in anatomy lab with formaldehyde in the air and exhaustion sitting in the bones. Long mornings in lecture halls where caffeine and fear competed for dominance. Long practicals. Long rounds. Long stretches where I forgot what season it was because hospitals flattened time. I changed there. There is no way not to. You hold too many stories. Too many bodies. Too many families saying, "We didn't know it was that serious." Too many patients apologizing for being sick. Too many moments where competence is the only mercy available in the room. I found my place in internal medicine first. Then emergency care called louder. The pace. The triage. The necessity of calm. The clear hierarchy of what matters now. I was good at it. Not because I lacked feeling. Because I had spent my whole life reading rooms fast. By second year of medical school, I could walk into a tense family waiting area and know within 30 seconds who was going to need a chair, who was going to need facts, and who was going to need someone to say, very plainly, that panic would not help the patient breathe. Pain had trained me. Medicine gave it purpose. Daniel stayed. That matters enough to say simply, he stayed. Through exams, through sleep deprivation, through the version of me that forgot birthdays and cried in parking garages and once fell asleep on the kitchen floor with flashcards stuck to my sweater. He proposed after my third year. Not in public. Not with spectacle. But on a rainy Sunday in our apartment while tomato soup simmered on the stove and we were both in socks. No audience. No script. Just honesty. I said yes before he finished the question. My mother found out and immediately started talking about guest lists as if access had always been her birthright. I let that pass. Not because it did not matter. Because I had learned timing. And timing, unlike anger, compounds. By final year, Belmere had fully rewritten my story into something convenient. In town, I was no longer the girl whose family skipped her high school graduation. I was the hometown medical success. The local paper wanted an interview. My old principal wanted to highlight my journey. A women's club I had never heard of invited me to speak at a luncheon. My father started receiving customers who mentioned me by name and acted impressed that he had a doctor in the family. Even though I was not one yet. Not officially. Almost. That almost mattered to me more than it seemed to matter to anyone else. Maybe because I knew how many nearly's life can bury a person under. And that is where I need to stop. Part 1. Because by the time the town started claiming me, the invitations had already begun. The principal, the newspaper, the church, my parents. Everybody suddenly wanted to be close to the finish line. But one envelope arrived after that which changed everything. And when I opened it, I understood that my medical school graduation was not going to be a ceremony. It was going to be a reckoning. The envelope came in early March. Cream cardstock. University seal. My full name in dark blue ink. For a second, standing in the apartment kitchen, with rain tapping softly against the window above the sink, I thought it was just another administrative packet, another schedule, another form, another reminder that even reaching the end of medical school required 6 signatures and 3 passwords. But when I opened it, a folded letter slid into my hand. I had been chosen as one of the student speakers for graduation. Not the keynote. Not the valedictorian equivalent. Something better. In a way. A student reflection. 7 minutes. A closing address after the awards and before the conferral. I read the letter twice. Then a third time. Daniel was at the table, grading middle school essays with a red pen and the expression of a man trying not to laugh at sentences that used the phrase, "in conclusion," as emotional camouflage. "What is it?" he asked. I sat down. Very carefully. Like sudden joy could be spilled. They picked me. For what? To speak at graduation? His whole face changed. That brightening, that immediate, uncalculated pride. He stood so fast, his chair scraped the floor. "Leah." I laughed because he sounded more emotional than I felt. Then I realized that was wrong. I was emotional. I just had not caught up to it yet. He came around the table and kissed my forehead. "You were always going to be picked." "No," I said, still staring at the letter. "No, I was not always anything." He understood that. That was one of the reasons I loved him. He understood that for some people, achievement is not just achievement. It is retrieval. Proof gathered over years. Something stolen being slowly returned. I should tell you now that I did not immediately think of revenge. I thought of responsibility. That is the strange thing about healing. You do not always wake up one day transformed into a person without old injuries. Sometimes you become more disciplined about where you place them. I thought about the stage, the audience, the faculty, my classmates, their families. All the years packed into one room. Then, inevitably, I thought about Belmere. Because the university sent each speaker a small feature form for the program booklet. Hometown. Intended specialty. Short note of thanks. The kind of thing local newspapers love to reuse. The kind of thing that traveled. And Belmere loved nothing more than a chance to act like it had produced excellence on purpose. I had not even filled out the form before the calls started. The first one came from my mother. I was leaving a 12-hour hospital shift. My scrubs wrinkled. My feet throbbing. The inside of my mask, still carrying the stale warmth of my own breath. It was one of those evenings where the sky turned violet at the edges, and the parking garage smelled like wet concrete and gasoline. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered, "Hey." Her voice came in too brightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" I unlocked my car, Told you what? That you're speaking at graduation? So, it had already traveled. I leaned against the car door and closed my eyes for a second. I just found out. Well, the church secretary's niece's daughter is in nursing there. And she saw some university post online. Leah. That is huge. Yeah. I said, it's nice. Nice. As if I had just been given a mug. She ignored the restraint entirely. We need to know how many tickets we're getting. There it was. No pause. No question about how I felt. No reverence for what it had taken. Just access. The old hunger wearing a cleaner outfit. I don't know yet. Well, find out. Your father is already talking about driving up the night before. I said nothing. The silence stretched long enough that her tone changed. What? I opened the car and sat in the driver's seat without starting it. What makes you think you're invited? There are moments in life when truth leaves your mouth before politeness can put a hand on its shoulder. This was one of them. She actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because she thought I was being dramatic. Leah, don't be ridiculous. I'm not. A beat. Then, quieter. Sharper. You can't mean that. I looked out at the top level of the parking garage. Rainwater reflected the orange lamps in long, shivering streaks. Below me, the city moved in steady, practical lines, headlights. Crosswalks. Buses. People carrying dinner home in paper bags. I do. I said, after everything, you'd keep us from your graduation? I almost admired the construction of that sentence. After everything. As if time itself were an act of service. As if survival erased debt. My voice stayed calm. Yes. She inhaled hard enough for me to hear it. Your father will be devastated. That would have landed harder if I had not already once crossed a stage to 6 empty seats. Instead, all I felt was a strange, distant clarity. Now he knows how ceremonies can be disappointing. She went silent. Not wounded. Stunned. In families like mine, what shocks them is rarely the injury they caused. It is the moment you stop cooperating with the family version of events. When she spoke again, her voice had gone cold. You are holding on to something from years ago like a child. No. I said, I'm making a decision like an adult. Then I hung up. My hands shook afterward. Not from guilt. From adrenaline. Boundaries are often described as clean. They are not. Not in the beginning. In the beginning, they feel like violence when you were trained to make yourself available. By the time I got home, there were 3 voicemails. One from my mother. Angry. One from Kelsey. Confused and indignant in the breathless way only favored daughters can be. And one from my father. Short. Call me. I didn't. Not that night. Instead, I changed clothes, washed the hospital out of my skin, and stood in the kitchen while Daniel heated leftover soup. The apartment smelled like garlic, laundry detergent, and the peace of being known without being managed. He watched my face and said, "Who called?" "My family." "And?" I said, "They're not invited." He nodded once. No flinch. No lecture about reconciliation. Nothing sentimental. Just, how do you feel? That question. Simple. Exact. The sort of question that reveals the architecture of a relationship. I leaned against the counter. Terrible. He waited. And relieved? He passed me a bowl. That sounds about right. That night, lying in bed with streetlight bands crossing the ceiling, I went back farther than I expected. Not to high school graduation. Earlier. To all the smaller stages before that. Piano recitals, I quit because no one came. Science fair nights where my poster board stood crooked while other parents brought snacks and cameras. A spelling bee in 4th grade, where I made it to the final round and looked for my mother in the audience, until I realized she had never gotten off work because she had forgotten to request the time. Those memories did not feel dramatic when they happened. That is how neglect hides. It arrives in individual moments small enough to sound petty when told out loud. But stack enough of them together, and you build a person who expects emptiness before applause. That was what I had spent years undoing. Not just the hurt, the expectation. The next morning, I called Priya. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Good." I laughed. "That's it?" "That's it. Good." "I thought you might say I should think about it." "I've been thinking about it for you since we were 17. She said, "This is not revenge over one missed ceremony. This is a consequence over a pattern." That distinction mattered. Pattern. Not accident. Not misunderstanding. Pattern. Priya had a way of clearing the emotional fog. "If you invite them," she continued, "they'll treat the whole thing like proof they were always supportive. They'll take pictures. They'll post them. They'll make your hardest-earned moment into family PR." I closed my eyes, because that was exactly what I feared. Not their presence alone, their revision. The theft of meaning. My mother crying in a pew-like auditorium seat as though she had spent years holding me together. My father shaking hands with faculty he could not name. Travis and Kelsey showing up late and still somehow behaving like insiders. No, I had not come this far to host my own erasure in better lighting. "I know," I said. "Then don't do it." Word spread through Belmere in layers. Church first. Then the paper. Then the old school network. Then the repair shop. Then the pharmacy. Then the women who always seemed to know private news while pretending they had prayed their way into it. I found out because my phone changed texture. Suddenly, people who had not spoken to me in years were messaging to say they were proud. A former teacher wrote, "Your hometown is cheering for you." The local paper emailed asking for a statement. My old principal invited me to stop by Belmere High before the big day so they could take a photo in front of the school sign. I declined politely. Too politely. If I am honest, years of training do that. They make restraint feel more moral than anger. Even when anger is the clearer language. The university sent out ticket details 2 weeks later. Graduates received 6 guest tickets, with a wait list for extras depending on returns. 6. I stared at the email long enough to laugh once under my breath. 6. The same number as high school. Life is not usually poetic on purpose. But sometimes it has timing. I knew immediately who those tickets were for. Daniel, Priya, Mr. and Mrs. Patel, Marta Ruiz, and Mrs. Ellison. That last one took effort. She was older now and did not travel easily. But when I called her, she did not even let me finish the invitation before saying yes. "I want to see this with my own eyes," she said. There was a smile in her voice. "And Leah?" "Yeah?" "Do not you dare spend this milestone accommodating people who treated your becoming as optional." I stood in the call room hallway at the hospital. Pager clipped to my waist. White coat folded over one arm. And had to blink hard at the linoleum floor for a few seconds before I could answer. "Okay," I said softly. "Good girl," she said. Not childish. Not patronizing. Just proud. I had rarely heard pride sound clean. Meanwhile, my family escalated. My father drove up unannounced one Saturday afternoon. Daniel was grading at the table again. And I was trying to write a thank you note to a mentor when I heard a knock sharp enough to suggest ownership. I looked through the peephole and almost laughed. Richard Hale. Baseball cap. Work boots. Arms folded like he had arrived to settle a repair estimate. I opened the door but did not step back to invite him in. He noticed. Fathers always notice when a daughter stops arranging the room around them. "Can I come in?" "No." He looked past me, taking in the apartment in a quick, efficient sweep. Bookshelves. Graduation announcements. Daniel's coat on the chair. Proof of a life not routed through him. His mouth tightened. "So, this is how it's going to be." "Yes?" He exhaled through his nose. For a second I saw age in him more than authority. Gray in the beard. Deepening lines around the mouth. The sort of physical wear that can almost trick you into compassion before memory corrects the record. "Your mother's upset." "I'm aware." "You're embarrassing us." There it was. Not hurting us. Embarrassing us. Belmere in one sentence. I leaned against the doorframe. "No, I'm refusing to perform for you." His jaw moved once. He was a man who preferred anger because it was easier than introspection. "You're punishing us for one mistake." "Stop saying that." "For God's sake." "Leah." "No." My voice sharpened. "You do not get to flatten years into one missed day just because one missed day is easier for you to defend." He stared at me. I kept going. Every time I needed something that cost money. Attention. Planning. Or emotional energy. I was told to be realistic. Independent. Patient. Flexible. Understanding. Travis got investment. Kelsey got protection. I got instructions on how not to be inconvenient. That's not fair. It is remarkable how often people use that word when facts start landing. It's accurate. He shifted his weight. For the first time, he looked less angry than uncertain. That almost hurt more, because uncertainty suggested he might actually be reviewing the evidence. "Your brother had opportunities." "So did I." "You were always different." I laughed once. "Yes, I was the only one expected to survive, neglect gracefully." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You've done well." There are compliments that arrive too late to qualify as comfort. This was one of them. "I did well without you." I said, "That is not the same as because of you." The hallway smelled faintly of someone else's laundry detergent and stale air conditioning. From another apartment came the muffled sound of a television audience laughing. Normal life. One wall over. My father looked suddenly tired. I can't change the past. No. Then what do you want from me? A better question would have been what I had wanted then. But people who fail you often become philosophical only when the bill arrives. I don't want anything from you. I said, that's the point. His eyes moved over my face, trying to find softness. History. Duty. Some old door. He found none. He left 10 minutes later with stiff shoulders and no invitation. When I closed the door, I realized my heart was hammering so hard it made my hands cold. Daniel came over quietly. You okay? No. I said. He nodded. Okay. Then he held me while I shook. That, too, is part of boundaries no one talks about. Sometimes the right choice still feels like grief, because the fantasy dies. Not the fantasy that they were wonderful. That fantasy had been dead for years. The fantasy that one perfect milestone might finally make them tell the truth about who I had always been. Graduation week arrived in a blur of logistics. Finale évaluation. Checklists. Return forms. White coat photographs. Pinned cords. Messages from classmates. My speaker draft changed 7 times. Not because I did not know what I wanted to say, because I knew exactly what I wanted to say. And 7 minutes is not much room to hold years. There was also the question of tone. Medical school graduations are full of phrases like resilience, calling, journey, privilège, humility. Some of those words are real. Some are ceremonial wallpaper. I did not want to speak like a brochure. I wanted to say something that could survive contact with actual pain. Daniel sat with me on Tuesday night while I revised on the couch. The apartment was dim, except for the lamp near the bookshelf. Outside. A siren passed and faded. Inside. My laptop glowed against my knees. What do you want them to feel? He asked. I thought about it. Sayan. I said first. Then, after a pause, and warned. He smiled slightly. That's very you. I looked up. What does that mean? It means you don't just want to inspire people. You want to tell the truth in a way that prevents repetition. He was right. Some people tell stories to be admired for surviving. I wanted mine to function like a mirror. The day before graduation, my mother sent a final text. We're driving up anyway. If you change your mind, let us know. Family should be there for milestones. I stared at the message, so long the screen dimmed. Family should be there for milestones. Yes, that was. In fact, the issue. They should have been. Years ago, when it counted without social reward, when my success was still hypothetical, when showing up required love rather than appetite, I set the phone down without answering. Graduation morning opened clear and bright. One of those spring days that seems almost indecent in its loveliness. Blue sky, thin gold light, trees just full enough to cast real shade. The campus looked staged for memory. Families streamed toward the auditorium carrying flowers, garment bags, cameras, coffee cups, folded maps. The air smelled like cut grass. Perfume, sunscreen, and nerves. Graduates gathered in black robes trimmed with color, according to specialty. Fabric whispered as we moved. Tassels brushed cheeks. White coat pins flashed in the sun. There is something strange about dressing formally for a threshold you nearly crawled to. Everything looked polished. Very little of the cost was visible. Except in people's faces. You could always tell the students who had carried more. Not because they looked broken, because their joy had weight. Mine did. My 6 guests met me by the side entrance. Mrs. Ellison wore lavender and sensible shoes. Marta Ruiz wore navy and looked like she might still reorganize the event for efficiency if given 10 minutes. Mr. Patel had bought a tie that matched Priya's dress. Mrs. Patel hugged me and kissed both my cheeks before stepping back to inspect me like a final exam. She had no intention of letting me fail. Priya just looked at me for a long second and said, "There she is." Daniel stood a little behind them all, hands in his pockets, smiling in that quiet way that always made me feel steadier. I looked at the 6 of them and felt something inside me settle. Not triumph. Something better. Rightness. The auditorium was enormous compared to Belmere High's gym. Vaulted ceiling. Warm wood paneling. Soft blue seats rising in neat arcs. The stage draped in university banners and white floral arrangements. Everything smelled faintly of polished floors and expensive air conditioning. Backstage, graduates adjusted hoods and laughed too loudly and practiced not crying. I stood near the curtain with my folded speech in one hand. My pulse was calm. That surprised me. Not because the day was easy. Because for once I was not dividing myself between the moment itself and the pain of who was missing from it. Nothing was missing. That was the difference. A coordinator clipped a mic pack to my robe and whispered timing cues. Then she said, "Big crowd. They had to open overflow seating." I smiled automatically. Then the sentence landed. Overflow. Of course. My hometown had spread the news. The paper had posted. The university had highlighted student speakers. Everybody wanted proximity to a good ending. A classmate beside me glanced toward the wings. "There are people standing in the back already." Another laughed. My whole family tree came. Then she looked at me. "How about yours?" I said. "The right people did." She nodded like that was normal. "Maybe. For here, it was. For me, it felt like a sentence I had spent years earning." The ceremony began. Names. Honors. Faculty applause. Parents leaning dangerously into aisles for photographs. Every few minutes, a wave of noise rose and fell as another graduate crossed into the version of their life they had been paying for in sleep and skin. I watched from the lineup. Half present. Half elsewhere. Not in the past exactly. In conversation with it, I thought of the white gown at 17. The hot gym. The empty chairs. The way I had kept my face still. I thought of the girl who had gone home that night and started packing evidence under her bed because some part of her understood that memory alone would not be enough. I wanted to reach backward and touch her shoulder. Not to comfort her. To tell her she would become someone whose life was no longer organized around being overlooked. When my turn came to speak, the dean introduced me with the warm, polished language institutions use when they are proud of selecting the right kind of resilience. Top evaluations. Service awards. Student speaker. Future emergency physician. I stepped to the podium. The lights were brighter than I expected. For a second, the audience was just shape and color. Then my eyes adjusted. Rows of faces, flower bouquets, programs, phones held up discreetly and not discreetly at all. And in the center left section, 6 people I loved looking directly at me. That anchored everything. I unfolded my pages. Then I looked up and began. Good afternoon. When people imagine medical school, they tend to imagine the obvious things first. The exams, the anatomy lab, the long nights, the debt, the caffeine, the impossible amount of information we were expected to carry in bodies that still needed sleep. And all of that is true. But I think what changes us most is something quieter. It is the accumulation of moments when another human being places their trust in your hands. Sometimes that trust comes from a patient. Sometimes it comes from a family member waiting in a hard chair under bad lighting, hoping someone will tell them the truth clearly. Sometimes it comes from the classmate who shares notes because they can see you're drowning. Or the attending who gives you one more chance to answer because they remember what it felt like to learn in public. Medicine teaches you science. But if you're lucky, it also teaches you attention. And attention is one of the purest forms of care. Many of us standing here know what it feels like to be changed by being seen at the right time. A mentor, a friend, a patient, a nurse, a teacher, someone who looked at us, not for what would be convenient, but for what was actually there. And I think that matters because medicine is full of people at their most vulnerable. People who are frightened, people who are in pain, people who are tired of being dismissed, people whose symptoms were explained away one too many times, people who are trying to stay brave for someone else. If this education has given us anything worth keeping, I hope it is this. May we never become so efficient that we stop noticing. May we never become so confident that we stop listening. May we never become the kind of professionals who confuse familiarity with understanding. And may we remember that sometimes what saves a person is not brilliance first. Sometimes it is presence. To my classmates, thank you for the generosity, humor, and grit you carried into rooms that did not always deserve how hard you worked in them. To the faculty who taught us with rigor and dad, on our better days, with grace, thank you. And to the people who showed up for us before, there was a title attached to our names before the credentials, before the certainty, before the applause, thank you most of all. Because being believed in early is one kind of gift. But being believed in when the outcome is not yet impressive to anybody else is something even rarer. That kind of faith can change a life. Today we graduate with knowledge. Yes, but also with memory. Memory of what it felt like not to know. Memory of what it felt like to be tired. Memory of what it felt like to need help. I hope we keep those memories close. Not as weight, as instruction. Congratulations. Class of. I finished. The applause came fast and full. Not polita. Not ceremonial. Real. It moved through the auditorium in a wave. And for one suspended second, I could feel 2 timelines sitting beside each other. The gym, and this, the empty row, and this, being forgotten. And this, I stepped away from the podium before emotion could climb too high into my throat. Back in line, one of my classmates squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. That was beautiful, she whispered. I nodded. Could not speak. Then the conferral began. Rows moved. Names called. Hoods adjusted. Caps tilted. The whole solemn machinery of transition. When my own name was read, I crossed the stage to louder applause than I expected. Not because I thought I did not deserve it, because part of me still had old wiring. I took the diploma tube, shook hands, smiled for the official photograph, and on the way down the steps I heard it. Not one voice. 6. Then more. Priya. Danielle. Mrs. Ellison. Marta. The Patels. And somewhere beyond them, a broader swell. The standing section, the back rows, people cheering. For me, not because they owned me, not because they could rewrite me, just because I had become visible on a scale that no one could deny. After the ceremony, everything dissolved into the usual beautiful chaos. Photos, hugs, flowers, laughter loud with relief, faculty being cornered by families, students crying into each other's shoulders, a brass ensemble somewhere in the lobby trying to sound dignified over the noise. I was taking pictures with Priya and Daniel near a column wrapped in blue ribbon when I saw them. My parents, Travis, Kelsey, standing 20 feet away behind a low velvet divider meant to keep non-ticketed guests from crowding the graduate photo area. Of course they had come. Not inside, but close. Close enough to say they had traveled. Close enough to tell people they had tried. My mother spotted me first. Her whole face rearranged itself into emotion. She lifted a hand. I did not move. Daniel followed my line of sight and went very still beside me. Priya muttered, "Unbelievable." My father stepped forward until the event volunteer gently blocked him. He looked embarrassed by the obstruction. Good. He caught my eye and gestured. Small and urgent. Like proximity itself should reopen everything. I handed my flowers to Mrs. Patel. Then I walked over. Not quickly. Not angrily. Just steadily. The volunteer looked relieved when I stopped on my side of the divider. My mother was already crying. Real tears. I think that is important to say, because people can wound you sincerely. Emotion does not erase pattern. Leah, she said, you were incredible. I waited. My father cleared his throat. We came. I looked at the velvet rope between us. Yes. I said, I can see that. Kelsey folded her arms. You really weren't going to let us in? I turned to her. No. She shook her head like I was the unreasonable one. That is so extreme. I almost smiled. Because there it was again. The family habit of measuring my reaction more harshly than the thing that caused it. Travis tried a different angle. Look, can we not do this here? That sentence, updated for a nicer venue. I looked directly at him. This is exactly where it gets done. My mother flinched. People nearby were pretending not to listen, which meant, of course, that they were listening with professional dedication. A town never really leaves your body. Neither does an audience. My father lowered his voice. You made your point? No, I said. You think this is about making a point? My pulse remained remarkably steady. That surprised me. Maybe because the years between 17 and now had done what time sometimes does best. Turned raw hurt into shaped truth. You missed my high school graduation? I said, not loudly, but clearly. All of you. You left me to cross that stage alone, while you followed what mattered more to you. My mother started to speak. I raised a hand just slightly. For once, she stopped. You did not miss one event. I continued. You missed years. You missed every version of support that would have mattered when there was no social reward attached to it. You told me to be realistic whenever I wanted something. You called me independent when what you meant was neglected. You used my discipline to excuse your absence. My father's face had gone red. Not from anger this time. From exposure. Leah, he said. People are watching. Yes. I said, that happened to me too. That landed. I saw it in all of them. The gym had entered the conversation at last. Whether they wanted it to or not. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Kelsey looked away. Travis shifted his weight for the first time, like a man who had just realized confidence was not the same as innocence. I took one breath and finished what I had waited years to say. You do not get front row access to the outcome when you abandon the process. Silence. Heavy. Perfect. Then quieter. Because this part was not for the crowd. It was for me. I am not saying this to humiliate you. I am saying it because I am done helping you misunderstand what happened. My mother whispered. We were proud of you. I believed, she believed that. I also knew it was insufficient. Being proud from a distance is easy. I said, showing up when it costs you something is love. That was the closest thing to a verdict I needed. My father looked older than he had outside my apartment. Truly older. Like the years had finally introduced themselves. What happens now? He asked. There are questions that used to terrify me because I thought every answer had to leave a door open. This one did not. Now, I said, you let me have the day you already missed once. No speech could have ended it better. Because that was not a performance line. It was the exact truth. My mother cried harder. Travis looked at the floor. Kelsey's face pinched in a way that suggested she had never considered a world in which access was not automatic. My father nodded once. Small. Defeated. And stepped back. Not transformed. Not healed. Just moved. Sometimes that is enough for one day. I turned and walked back toward the people who had actually earned their place in my joy. Behind me, no one followed. Priya was waiting with my flowers and an expression of such furious satisfaction that I nearly laughed. What? I said. That, she whispered, was art. Daniel put a hand at the center of my back. Not possessive. Anchoring. Marta Ruiz nodded, like I had completed a complicated procedural checklist correctly. Mrs. Ellison, who had heard enough to understand everything, simply said, Good. And then the photographer asked us to bunch closer. So we did. There is a picture from that moment that still sits framed in my office now. Not because everyone in it looks perfect. We don't. Daniel's tie is crooked. Priya is mid-laugh. Mrs. Patel is crying and trying not to. Mr. Patel forgot to take off his sunglasses, and pushed them into his hair too late. Marta looks stern on purpose. Mrs. Ellison looks triumphant. And I look calm. Not ecstatic. Not vindictive. Calm. Because the thing I had wanted most was not revenge in the theatrical sense. It was alignment. Reality matching memory. Truth standing in daylight without my help. After the photos, we went to lunch at a restaurant overlooking the river. White tablecloths. Cold butter in little curls. Water glasses sweating in the light. I had reserved the private room months earlier with money I should have used for something responsible. I regret nothing. We ate too slowly. We told stories. Daniel proposed a toast so heartfelt Priya accused him of trying to make the rest of us look emotionally underprepared. Mrs. Ellison gave me a fountain pen engraved with my initials. Marta gave me a trauma shears keychain and said, "For sentimentality and utility." Mr. Patel picked up the entire check before I could stop him. Mrs. Patel squeezed my hand and said, "You built a life that knows how to answer back?" That sentence stayed. Later that evening, back at the apartment, I finally looked at my phone. There were dozens of messages. Classmates. Mentors. Former teachers. Town acquaintances. People who had seen the speech online, because of course someone had posted it. Belmere was already circulating clips with captions about hometown girl makes good. I nearly put the phone down again. Then I saw one message from an unknown number. No contact saved. Just a local area code. I opened it. It was from my old principal. I need to apologize. I remember that high school graduation. I remember seeing your family seats empty. I should have checked on you more carefully afterward. I'm sorry. And I'm proud of the physician you've become. I sat with that for a long time. Because regret from the wrong people can feel useless. But regret from witnesses matters. Not for healing everything. For correcting the record. I wrote back, "Thank you. That means more than you know." My mother texted the next day. No theatrics. No guilt. Just, "You were right about more than I wanted to admit. I don't expect forgiveness on your timeline. But I heard you." I read it twice. Then set the phone down. I did not answer immediately. That, too, was new. Not because I wanted to punish her with silence. Because I no longer rushed to make other people comfortable at the cost of my own processing. Weeks passed. Residency began. Emergency medicine consumed my life in exactly the ways I had hoped and feared. 12-hour shifts became 14. Coffee became infrastructure. I learned new names, new systems, new ways to carry urgency without letting it colonize every room inside me. And slowly, very slowly, contact with my family changed shape. Not warm, not easy, but more honest. My father stopped calling only when he wanted public updates. My mother started asking direct questions and listening to the answers. Though not always well. Kelsey apologized one winter over the phone in a voice stripped of its usual entitlement. She said she had not understood the family because she had benefited from it. That was the smartest thing she had ever said to me. Travis took longest. Of course he did. Golden sons often mistake preferential treatment for merit until life removes enough cushioning to educate them. But even he came around eventually. Though awkwardly. After his own daughter was born, Fatherhood has a way of introducing men to accountability they once thought was optional. Did everything heal? No, that is not how stories like this end. At least not true ones. There was no magical holiday reunion where everybody cried in the right order and language repaired itself completely. No montage of perfect Sundays. No family portrait redeemed by soft focus. What happened instead was smaller. Better? We became people who could no longer lie about the past in my presence. That was enough for a beginning. Daniel and I married the following spring, under a canopy of oak trees behind a botanical garden. Small ceremony. 40 guests. No one got automatic authority because of blood. My mother was invited. My father too. They came early. They were respectful. They did not behave as if attendance erased history. That mattered. Sometimes growth is not grand. Sometimes it is simply the absence of old entitlement. A year after that, I drove through Belmere on the way back from a conference. I had not planned to stop, but I found myself turning down the old school road just before sunset. The campus looked smaller than memory. That happens. Brick front. Flagpole. Windows catching orange light. The gym doors were locked. But through the narrow glass panel, I could see the polished floor and the folded bleachers. I stood there in my work clothes, one hand on my car keys, and looked at the place where 17-year-old me had learned what public absence feels like. Then I pictured the auditorium years later. The applause, the speech, the velvet divider, the sentence I had waited half a life to say, and I realized something simple. The opposite of being abandoned is not being celebrated by a crowd. It is being valued accurately by the right people. Crowds are temporary. Truth is quieter than that. I got back in my car and drove home before dark. That night, after my shift, I unlocked the front door to the apartment Daniel, and I still loved, despite its uneven floors and stubborn windows. The place smelled like rosemary chicken and lemon dish soap. He looked up from the stove and said, "How was the drive?" I set my bag down. "Did he?" I said. He smiled because he knew me well enough to hear the translation. Not easy. Not devastating. Resolved enough for now. Later, when the dishes were done and the city had gone mostly quiet, I stood in the bathroom brushing out my hair and caught my own reflection in the mirror. 30-something. Tired. Capable. A doctor now. A wife. A woman who had once been left alone in a gym and had not mistaken that abandonment for a verdict on her worth. That felt like the real graduation. Not the robe. Not the stage. Not even the speech. The real graduation was internal. It was the moment I stopped auditioning for love from people who only appreciated me once other people did first. If you have ever had your milestones minimized by the people who should have protected them, I want to say something clearly. You are not cruel for remembering accurately. You are not bitter for refusing revision. And you are not required to hand your hard-earned joy to the same people who treated your becoming like an inconvenience. Forgiveness, if it comes, should not require amnesia. Réconciliation, if it happens, should not be built on lies. And pride that only appears after applause is not the same thing as love. Sometimes justice is loud. A public reckoning. A sentence delivered at exactly the right moment. But sometimes justice is quieter than that. Sometimes it is a guest list. A closed door. A calm voice. A life so fully built that the people who once dismissed you are forced to meet you on honest ground or not at all. Nobody came to my high school graduation. The day I graduated medical school, the whole town wanted a seat. But in the end, only 6 people needed one. Because they were the ones who had already shown me what it means to stay. And that made all the difference.